Well, it is time now to turn our attention over to the markets. Earlier this week, Tredas Commodity Consultant Doug Simon stopped by our studio to go over the latest trends in the grain markets. Here are his thoughts from Monday morning.
Let's start today's conversation talking about the WASDE, which was released last week. Mostly some tweaks on the international front. What were you paying attention to?
Well, the biggest one was China. USDA went back and raised their exports last year by about 3.6 million metric tons, and then they also increased the demand or the exports or their imports by another 3 million metric tons. So you've got a little over 6 million metric tons that are going to be going to China, and they actually went back and have been looking at the shipments or actual shipping data rather than believing what China predicts or what they're forecasting on their imports. So that's what they're doing now, which, yeah, so USDA is getting better at evaluating something, on our balance sheets, which I think everybody will applaud. But that's, if you look at 6 million metric tons, 40 million bushels a metric ton, that's about, 240 million bushels, which our carryover for this next year is projected to be around 315 million bushels. So that's a nice benefit to see them allegedly importing more beans.
Well, we'll see how that story develops. To your point, Doug, we look at the charts in particular for corn and soybeans. We've had a nice little boost here so far in the month of March. Some of that, I suppose, we could tie to the WASDE. What else is giving a little bit of a bullish sentiment here?
Well, it's been bearish for 5 months, since last October, and it's just been every day you come in, it'd start out a little lower, and then it would just, kind of waterfall lower every day. Now we've actually maybe turned to the point where the funds got record short on corn a couple weeks ago. Now they're record short on the soybeans, but with those funds having massive, and the managed funds or the people that are kind of speculating in the markets have got a massive short on. At some point, I know a lot of people have been talking about it in the press and news, but at some point they'll get pushed out of that. Typically happens where the commercials now, they've actually been buying where they'll come in and start selling that. But as they start to deleverage out of that short position, we should see a little bit of a rally. And we've been seeing that where, like this morning, corn was down 3 or 4 and beans were down 10. Wheat was down quite a bit. Wheat actually is 30 cents off its low today, and corn's maybe 6 off its low, and beans are maybe 5 off its low. But we're starting to see more of a, start out lower but turn higher today, which is actually kind of a nice sign.
Yeah, anytime we can see green on the screen, people are happy about that.
Absolutely.
You keep a close eye on the spreads. What have you been tracking on that front?
Well, we've been, last year we were in inverse where the nearby was, higher than the deferred. Now we've been in a carry market, and we were 25 cents a carrier, which was a record. I think the most we ever saw between Dece corn and March corn was 18 previously. We got out to 25, so we're still got a decent spread out from May to the July. It tells you that we've got adequate stocks around. Our basis levels are, maybe a 5 over to 10 over type level, the May. So unfortunately, I don't really see basis levels exploding like we did the last 2 or 3 years, and those spreads being more of a carry market. So there's adequate corn around. So USDA's numbers didn't change on the carryover last week. We're still at 2.1 billion bushels. That's still adequate corn stock. So that even if we do get some type of short covering by the funds, there's still going to be a lot of overhead pressure from farmer selling.
Let's get your general sentiment here. We're not quite to planting season. A lot of people getting antsy about it, though. As you see where the markets could go over the next 6 months or so, what are going to be the key factors? Of course, right now it seems like all eyes on South America.
Right. That's a big deal with their weather, U.S. weather. I mean, we've shifted aggressively from an El Nino to La Nina. We've seen cool water off the west coast of Peru just pop up here in the last week. So that's a problem for us, if we tend to be cold up south of Alaska and then down off the coast of California. Elwyn Taylor, my favorite climatologist of all time, he always talked about, kind of La Nina, El Nino, and if there's that heat moves in north of Hawaii, that cold water's up there. If we do make that transition, that tends to leave us drier here, tends to put the heat out here in the western plains, and it doesn't bode well. But Brazil is also fighting some of that same deal where, like our crop here in the U.S. last year, we had a lot of variable rain. If you look at what's going on in Brazil right now, they've got 130% of moisture in some areas, and then they've got 30% of moisture over the last 30 days. So a lot of people are saying, well, there's some low areas. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's some areas that are going to have decent yields, so there's a lot of variability. We had that here in the U.S., but that La Nina tends to leave us definitely drier next year. So that's important. Then at the end of the month, we've got acres. So when you put those acres and projected yields together, we're supposed to grow carry out somewhere between 2.3 billion to 2.5 billion, assuming we have a 181 bushel crop. Are we going to have that? We don't know. but that's what they're using today. So you got to think about, if that happens, seasonally, we tend to go lower 70% of the time. That's what our crop insurance tells us. That's what those seasonal tell us. So we're kind of, I said, the baseball analogy, we're going to have some chances to get up to bat, take some swings here. We're going to get 3 strikes, or we're going to get, maybe some balls in there too, but you better be ready to do something, seasonally. Those funds are really short. If they start to cover, they give us some opportunities I think you need to be looking at. You can do some things with options from a strategy standpoint, use puts, or you can hedge or do a hedge drive and buy some calls, do some things that are flexible now before we don't know what the weather's going to do for sure, but it'll give you some time at least to get some floors underneath things with both your corn and your beans. Because we've had that last year when the funds were record long, you should be selling corn then, and now we're at the contrast to that where we're record short. Yeah, if we get the rallies, then you want to be selling. So, and now cattle have gone back to highs again. There was a lot of discouragement when we were at those lows on cattle, and we've been there just recently on the beans. We get those opportunities. We got to have a mindset to kind of be, okay, hey, what am I going to do about it now?
Got to capitalize it. Let's wrap up with this, Doug. Always seems like there's a conversation on the national front, corn versus beans. I don't know if that's really a story that is pertinent to those of us here in Nebraska. It seems like people are on their crop rotations and stick to that. On the national front, though, is that something we need to be paying attention to?
Well, University of Illinois, when they did their profitability numbers back in January, they were showing an advantage to the bean side of it, and probably a little bit of a break even or profitability in the beans and a loss on the corn. So I think there's probably, and we saw that in Brazil, they shifted out of corn and into beans this year, and there's some talk. We had a meeting back in January with a lot of our clients, and maybe 1 or 2 farmers raised their hands that they're going to shift to more beans. In Nebraska, dryland beans, that's a diversification from an agronomy standpoint or rainfall, tend to stay 50-50. You go a little bit further west, you're maybe 2/3, 1/3 beans. You go way west, you're more 75% corn and the quarter beans. But we've got those bean plants going in at David City, which I went by on Friday, and you could see it going up there, and there's one up in Norfolk. That's going to shift probably some of our acreage. I think there's probably a little more interest out west where we may see that over time. Maybe not this planting season, but over the next 2 or 3, I think we'll probably see some change.